Says alert now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo live in Cairo, Egypt, about to begin a speech where he is expected to outline the Trump administration plans regarding the Middle East policy, especially as it regards Iran, and expected to give a sharp rebuke on behalf of the previous Obama administration policy. Live to Cairo, here we go.
Here. I've had the good fortune to be a frequent visitor here to Egypt and the Middle East as Secretary of State. In my prior role as CI Director, I was here with some frequency, and I came here too as a member of Congress. Every time I come, I get to see something new, something wonderful. This trip is especially meaningful for me as an evangelical Christian coming so soon after the Coptic Church's Christmas celebrations. This is an important time. We're all children of Abraham. Christians, Muslims, Jews. In my office, I keep a Bible open on my desk to remind me of God and His Word and the truth. And it's the truth, lowercase t, that I'm here to talk about today. It is a truth that isn't often spoken in this part of the world, but because I'm a military man by training, I'll be very blunt and direct today. America is a force for good in the Middle East. We need to acknowledge that truth, because if we don't, we make bad choices, now and in the future. And our choices, the choices we make today, have consequences for nations and for millions and millions of people, for our safety, for our economic prosperity, for our personal freedoms, and those of our children. And there's no more appropriate place than where I'm standing today to have this discussion at the American University here in beautiful Cairo. As Frank said, this year marks 100 years since the founding of this institution. And the AUC is more than just a university. It is an important symbol of America's friendship with Egypt and what binds our people together. Together, we've created a modern place of learning in the midst of an ancient civilization with its own rich history of artists, poets, and intellectuals. Egypt has always been a land of striving, and yet, times, your aspirations and those of your brethren in the Middle East have seemed impossible to achieve. These lands witnessed convulsions from Tunis to Tehran as old systems crumbled and new ones struggled to emerge. That's happened here too. And at this critical moment, America, your longtime friend, was absent too much. Why? Because our leaders gravely misread our history and your historical moment. These fundamental misunderstandings set forth in this city in 2009 adversely affected the lives of hundreds of millions of people in Egypt and all across the region. Remember, it was here in this city, that another American stood before you. He told you that radical Islamist terrorism does not stem from an ideology. He told you that 9/11 led my country to abandon its ideals, particularly in the Middle East. He told you that the United States and the Muslim world needed, quote, a new beginning, end of quote. The results of these misjudgments have been dire. In falsely seeing ourselves as a force for what ails the Middle East, we were timid in asserting ourselves when the times and our partners demanded it. We grossly underestimated the tenacity and viciousness of radical Islamism, a debauched strain of the faith that seeks to upend every other form of worship or governance. ISIS drove to the outskirts of Baghdad as America hesitated. They raped and pillaged and murdered tens of thousands of innocents. They birthed the caliphate across Syria and Iraq and launched terror attacks that killed all across continents. America's reluctance, our reluctance to wield our influence, kept us silent as the people of Iran rose up against the mullahs in Tehran in the Green Revolution. The Ayatollahs and their henchmen murdered, jailed, and intimidated freedom-loving Iranians. And they wrongly blamed America for this unrest when it was their own tyranny that had fueled it. Emboldened, the regime spread its cancerous influence to Yemen, to Iraq, to Syria, and still further into Lebanon. Our penchant, America's penchant for wishful thinking, led us to look the other way as Hezbollah, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Iranian regime, accumulated a massive arsenal of approximately 130,000 rockets and missiles. They stored and positioned these weapons in Lebanese towns and villages in flagrant violation of international law. That arsenal is aimed squarely at our ally, Israel. When Bashar Assad unleashed terror upon ordinary Syrians and barrel-bombed civilians with sarin gas, a true echo of Saddam Hussein's gassing of the Kurdish people, we condemned his actions, but in our hesitation to wield power, we did nothing. Our eagerness to address only Muslims and not nations ignored the rich diversity of the Middle East and frayed old bonds. It undermined the concept of the nation-state, the building block of international stability. And our desire for peace at any cost led us to strike a deal with Iran, our common enemy. So today, what did we learn from all of this? We learned that when America retreats, chaos often follows. When we neglect our friends, resentment builds. And when we partner with our enemies, they advance. The good news is this: the age of self-inflicted American shame is over, and so are the policies that produce so much needless suffering. Now comes the real new beginning. In just 24 months, actually less than 2 years, the United States under President Trump has reasserted its traditional role as a force for good in this region. We've learned from our mistakes. We've rediscovered our voice. We've rebuilt our relationships. We've rejected false overtures from our enemies. And look at what we've accomplished. Look at what we've accomplished together. Under new leadership, America has confronted the ugly reality of radical Islamism. On President Trump's very first trip abroad to this region, he called on Muslim-majority nations to, quote, meet history's greatest test, to conquer extremism and vanquish the forces of terrorism. President Sisi joined us. He joined us in denouncing the twisted ideology which has brought death and suffering on so many. I thank President Sisi for his courage. As I said in a recent speech that I gave in Brussels, our words mean something again, and they should. West Point taught me a basic code of integrity. If we commit American prestige to an action, our allies depend on us to follow through. The Trump administration did not stand idly by when Bashar Assad used chemical weapons against his people. Indeed, President Trump unleashed the fury of the U.S. military not once, but twice with allied support. And he's willing to do it again, although we do hope that he does not have to. For those who fret about the use of American power, remember this: America has always been and always will be a liberating force, not an occupying power. We've never dreamed of domination in the Middle East. Can you say the same about Iran? In World War II, American GIs helped free North America from Nazi occupation. 50 years later, we assembled a coalition to liberate Kuwait from Saddam Hussein. Would the Russians or Chinese come to your rescue in the same way, the way that we have? And when the mission is over, when the job is complete, America leaves. Today, in Iraq, at the government's invitation, we have approximately 5,000 troops, where there were once 166,000. We once had tens of thousands of U.S. military personnel stationed in Saudi Arabia. Now that number is a tiny fraction. When we do set up major bases, as we've done in Bahrain, in Kuwait, and Qatar, and in Turkey and the Emirates, it's at the invitation of the host country. In that same spirit, just last year, America bolstered a coalition of allies and partners to dismantle the Islamic State's caliphate, liberating Iraqis, Syrians, Arabs and Kurds, Muslims and Christians, men, women, and children. President Trump empowered our commanders in the field to strike ISIS quicker and harder than ever before. And now, 99% of the territory ISIS once held is liberated. Life is returning to normal for millions of Iraqis and Syrians. Nations in the global coalition should all be enormously proud of this achievement. Together, we have saved thousands of lives. Our allies and partners have helped greatly in this counter-ISIS effort. France and Britain joined our strikes on Syria and have supported our anti-terror effort around the world. Jordan and Turkey have hosted millions of Syrians fleeing violence. Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries have generously contributed towards stabilization efforts. We thank all of them for their help, and we urge them to continue. The United States has also helped liberate areas as an important means of preventing the caliphate from reemerging. We've provided $2.5 billion in humanitarian assistance to Iraq since 2014, and our churches and nonprofits do good work there every day as well. We and our allies generated nearly $30 billion in grants and financing support to aid Iraq's reconstruction during the Kuwait Reconstruction Conference just this past year. Think about the people we're helping. Last year, I hosted the first ever Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom in Washington. At that conference, our ambassador at large recounted his trip to Iraq. There, he met Yazidi women who had been sold into bondage, whose children had been ripped out of their arms. Life under ISIS was real hell, a living hell on earth. Today, those areas are liberated thanks to our coalition's power and might and commitment. I recall a line from your late Nobel laureate, Naguib Mahfouz, quote, "Good is achieving victory every day. It may even be that evil is weaker than we imagine." Let's turn to Iran. President Trump has reversed our willful blindness to the danger of the regime and withdrew from the failed nuclear deal with its false promises. The U.S. reimposed sanctions that should never have been lifted. We embarked on a new pressure campaign to cut off the revenues the regime uses to spread terror and destruction throughout the world. We joined the Iranian people in calling for freedom and accountability. And importantly, we fostered a common understanding with our allies of the need to counteract the Iran regime's revolutionary agenda. Countries can increasingly understand that we must confront the Ayatollahs, not coddle them. Nations are rallying to our side to confront the regime like never before. Egypt, Oman, Kuwait, and Jordan have all been instrumental in thwarting Iran's efforts to evade sanctions. The UAE has canceled its imports of Iranian condensate following the reimposition of American sanctions. Bahrain has exposed the Revolutionary Guard proxies that are active in its country and is working to stop Iran's illicit maritime activities in its region. Saudi Arabia, too, has worked with us to counter Iranian expansion and regional influence. We, the United States, commend each of these efforts, and we seek for all nations to continue the work to constrain the full array of the regime's malign activity. The work to curb the regime's deadly ambitions isn't confined to the Middle East. America's friends and partners from South Korea to Poland have joined our effort to stop Iran's wave of regional destruction and global campaigns of terror. Countries across the globe have cut Iranian oil imports to zero and are working towards that goal. Private companies in France, Germany, Britain, and elsewhere have all calculated that enriching themselves through work with the regime is bad for business and bad for the people of their own countries. In Yemen, we've assisted our coalition partners as they take the lead in preventing an Iranian expansion that would be disastrous for world trade and regional security. As is always the case with America, our engagement has also been coupled with robust humanitarian aid. We've supported the UN talks to put Yemen on the path to peace. In Lebanon, Hezbollah remains a major presence, but we won't accept this status quo. Our aggressive sanctions campaign against Iran is also directed to the terror group and its leaders, including the son of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah. Now let's talk about America's efforts to build coalition. The Trump administration has moved quickly to rebuild links amongst our old friends and nurture new partnerships. My very first trip in this job included stops in Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. In fact, after being sworn in as Secretary of State, I visited these countries before I ever went to my office in Washington, D.C. And I welcome your leaders to my office often, as I did with Foreign Minister Shukri in August of last year. Coalition building for America is natural, but in past years we've neglected it. This administration has enjoyed fruitful relationships in the Middle East for hundreds of years, but we must keep them and work to keep them. Look, our ties stem back a long ways, with Morocco and Oman back to 1777 and 1833. And our friendship with the country in which we are today, Egypt, stems back generations. Indeed, this year marks the 70th anniversary of our diplomatic relations with Jordan. We're building out a healthy dialogue with the government of Iraq, a thriving and young democracy. We're also building relationships for our shared prosperity. It is time for old rivalries to end for the sake of the greater good of the region. The Trump administration is also working to establish the Middle East Strategic Alliance to confront the region's most serious threat and bolster energy and economic cooperation. This effort is bringing together members of the Gulf Cooperation Council as well as Egypt and Jordan. Today, we ask each of those countries to take the next step and help us solidify MESA. We're also seeing remarkable change. New bonds are taking root that were unimaginable until very recently. Who could have believed a few years ago that an Israeli prime minister would visit Muscat, or that new ties would emerge between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, or that a Roman Catholic Pope would visit this city to meet with Muslim imams and the head of the Coptic faith? In October of last year, the Israeli national anthem, played as an Israeli judo champion, was crowned the winner of a tournament in the United Arab Emirates. It was the first time that an Israeli delegation was allowed to participate under its own national flag. It was also the first time that an Israeli culture and sports minister attended a sports event in the Gulf. She said, and I quote, "It is a dream come true. For 2 years we had talks in order to reach this moment. It was hard for her to stop the tears." I want to thank the authorities in Abu Dhabi and our host here who received us in an exemplary manner. She could not have been happier. These steps towards rapprochement are necessary for greater security in the face of our shared threats. And they also hint at a much brighter future for the region. Of course, our work together is not finished. It's almost never America's work alone. The U.S. knows that we can't and shouldn't fight every fight or sustain every economy. No nation wants to be dependent on another. Our aim because the strong, secure, and economically vibrant Middle East is in our national interest, and it's in yours as well. Let me be clear. America will not retreat until the terror fight is over. We will labor tirelessly alongside you to defeat ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadists that threaten our security and yours. President Trump has made the decision to bring our troops home from Syria. We always do, and now is the time. But this isn't a change of mission. We remain committed to the complete dismantling of ISIS, the ISIS threat, and the ongoing fight against radical Islamism in all of its forms. But as President Trump has said, we're looking to our partners to do more, and in this effort, we will do so going forward, together. For our part, airstrikes in the region will continue as targets arise. We will keep working with our partners in the coalition to defeat ISIS. We will continue to hunt down terrorists who seek safe havens in Libya and in Yemen. Screen travelers, assist refugees, and more. But assist is the key phrase. We ask every peace-loving nation of the Middle East to shoulder new responsibilities for defeating Islamic extremism wherever we find it. It is important to know also that we will not ease our campaign to stop Iran's malevolent influence and actions against this region in the world. The nations of the Middle East will never enjoy security, achieve economic stability, or advance the dreams of their people if Iran's revolutionary regime persists on its current course. February 11th will mark 40 years since the oppressive regime came to power in Tehran. America's economic sanctions against the regime are the strongest in history and will keep getting tougher until Iran starts behaving like a normal country. The 12 demands that we stated in May remain in force because the regime's threat to the region endures. In Syria, the United States will use diplomacy and work with our partners to expel every last Iranian boot and work through the UN-led process to bring peace and stability to the long-suffering Syrian people. There will be no U.S. reconstruction assistance for areas of Syria held by Assad until Iran and its proxy forces withdraw, until we see irreversible progress towards a political resolution. In Lebanon, the United States will work to reduce the threat of Hezbollah's missile arsenal, which is aimed at Israel and can reach all points inside of that country. Many of these rockets are equipped with advanced guided systems courtesy of Iran, and that's unacceptable. Iran may think it owns Lebanon. Iran is wrong. In Iraq, the United States will help our partners build a nation free of Iranian influence. This past May, Iraqis rejected sectarianism in a national election, and we will support that wholeheartedly. The people there refuse to be cowed by Iranian-backed thugs and armed groups. Iraqis have strengthened ties with Arab neighbors, peacefully resumed cooperation between the Kurdish region and Baghdad, and have renewed their focus on fighting corruption. And in Yemen, we will continue to work for a lasting peace. And I think this is clear, but it is worth reiterating. The United States fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against the Iranian regime's aggressive adventurism. We will continue to ensure that Israel has the military capacity to do so decisively. The Trump administration will also continue to press for a real and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians. We've adhered to our word. President Trump campaigned on the promise to recognize Jerusalem, the seat of Israel's government, as the nation's capital. In May, we moved our embassy there. These decisions honor a bipartisan congressional resolution from more than 2 decades ago. President Trump acted on this commitment. The United States also is working to keep our bilateral relationship strong. Over the next few days, I'll hold in-depth discussions with leaders of Bahrain, the UAE. We'll talk about our shared goals, just as I did in Jordan and Iraq this week, and as I did today with President Sisi and Foreign Minister Shukri. And as we seek an even stronger partnership with Egypt, we encourage President Sisi to unleash the creative energy of Egypt's people, unfetter the economy, and promote a free and open exchange of ideas. The progress made to date can continue. I also applaud President Sisi's efforts to promote religious freedom, which stands as an example for all leaders and all peoples of the Middle East. I was happy to see our citizens, wrongly convicted of improperly operating NGOs here, finally be acquitted. And we strongly support President Sisi's initiative to amend Egyptian law so that this does not happen again. More work certainly needs to be done to maximize the potential of the Egyptian nation and its people. I'm glad that America will be a partner in those efforts. Let me close here with a couple of final thoughts. First, it's never easy to recognize truth, but when we see it, we must speak it. America has been criticized for doing too much in the Middle East, and we've been criticized for doing too little. But one thing we've never been is an empire builder or an oppressor. Just look at our history together, the history which I've recounted today. Look at our fights against common enemies. Look at our coalition building. And finally, just look around you at this university, which has existed now for a century. It's not a coincidence that many other American universities like this one thrive all across the Middle East, from Beirut to Sulaymaniyah. These are symbols of America's innate goodness, of our hopes for you, and of the better future we desire for all nations of the Middle East. I want to thank you all for being here today, and may the Lord bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo with a very clear message. Number one, America is a force for good in the Middle East. Number two, Iran needs to be reined in. Strong criticism of the previous administration policies. He says we are leaving Syria, but we are not leaving the fight. That message from Cairo.
A very blunt message from Pompeo. America's a force for good in the Middle East, period. He went on to look back at the Obama years, saying we grossly underestimated the tenacity and viciousness of radical Islam as far as the progress under President Trump. He said President Trump has asserted its traditional role as a force for good in the region because we've learned from our mistakes.
I want to bring the ranking member, House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCall, Texas Republican, with me now, sir. Good morning to you. Thank you for standing by. You were listening to the speech. Good speech. What's the strategy here, and why was that necessary?
Well, it was a very strong speech. It's about a new doctrine in the Middle East, the Trump doctrine. I think Mike Pompeo and I, when he was congressman, we traveled to Egypt, met with President Sisi, went to Sinai region where ISIS is prevalent. And what he's saying in the speech is that our allies can now trust us and our enemies must now fear us. I believe in the previous administration that was not happening. And I think that's why you saw the rise of radical Islamist terror. And I think he's saying that we're not going to retreat, that we're going to take the fight head on to radical Islamist terror. When it comes to Syria, I know there's been a lot of criticism of the withdrawal from Syria. I was one of those. I opposed Obama's retreat out of Iraq. I was not sanguine with the retreat out of Syria because I thought it would leave a vacuum for reconstitution of ISIS. Turks could come in and slaughter the Kurds that were our allies against ISIS and release the 3,000 ISIS prisoners. So, but I do think that Secretary Pompeo has sort of tempered that down, and I think Ambassador Bolton in his recent trip did the same by saying it's going to be a conditional withdrawal, that we're not retreating. And I think it was important for Secretary Pompeo to give this speech, to give people in the Middle East some confidence that America will still be there for them, that it will be a conditional withdrawal as long as we can defeat ISIS and make sure that Turkey will not destroy the Kurds, our allies in the region.
Let me
most importantly, protect Israel from Iran.
Just in the interest of time, I want to push forward to what I consider the key quote in here. Let me be clear, America will not retreat until the terror fight is over. He went on to say President Trump has made the decision to bring our troops home from Syria, concluding we always do and now is the time, but this is not a change of mission. You pointed out a very interesting idea there. And this has been part of the confusion over the past several weeks. So, you know, these allies in the Middle East have come to depend on the United States of America. And this is a point the president can make as well. When America gets involved, others depend on us. And how we choose to get out of these conflicts determines the fate and the future for millions.
I think that's correct. And I think what Mike, Secretary Pompeo, is saying is that the days of occupying countries in the Middle East are over. I think that was, in some respects, a failed foreign policy. And while we'll have a conditional withdrawal from Syria, it doesn't mean that we can't strike. When I talked to both the Secretary and Ambassador Bolton, it made it clear that if Assad uses chemical weapons, we have full capacity to respond to that. If ISIS reconstitutes, we have full capacity to strike them. So we're not going to occupy these countries, but we are going to be engaged, and we're going to make sure that our allies know that they're our friends and that we will defend them against radical Islamist terror.
Last question here. How do you think a message like this is being received in Tehran today?
Chilling message. And that's what I love about the Secretary. He and I worked very closely against the Iranian deal, for instance. The sanctions have now been replaced back on Iran. I think this is a strong message against Iran, aligning ourselves with Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Bahrain, all of our Muslim country partners, plus Israel against Iran. solidifying that support against our enemy, Iran.
Sir, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Michael McCall there, the Republican from Texas, live on Capitol Hill with instant reaction to that speech from Cairo. Thank you, sir. We'll speak again very soon, and thank you for your contribution there in Washington.
What a morning so far. So now we await the president. As you can see, the small picture at the bottom of your screen, he is about to depart for McAllen, Texas. He's heading down to the border. He could speak to reporters on his way down, so we'll keep an eye on that. It's a big moment for the president. A big moment in this debate in Washington, day 20 of the shutdown, amid more fighting over border wall funding, what we can expect from that trip, and the latest on those negotiations.
You know, we have had the back and forth that came immediately from the Situation Room yesterday. Democrats came out of the White House. They went back to Capitol Hill and suggested there was a temper tantrum thrown in the Situation Room. That was immediately disputed by Kirstjen Nielsen, Kevin McCarthy, and others inside the room there.
And the president himself.
Yeah, correct on that, by way of Twitter and other means. We do expect the president will, in all likelihood, I should characterize that, to take questions on the south lawn of the White House before he heads out of Marine One toward Air Force One and down to the Texas border. But this is the story of the moment here, Sandra, with the shutdown ongoing, and the question as to whether or not Democrats will concede at some point to some sort of fence/wall/border on the southern.
Tweeting out this morning, Make America Great Again, getting ready to leave for the great state of Texas. The chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Senator Ron Johnson, joins us next. Stay tuned.
We need a barrier. We have to stop people from coming in the way they come in. And if we don't have it, you can never have border security unless you have a steel barrier. I have the absolute right to do national emergency if I want.
What's your threshold for when you might make that?
My threshold will be if I can't make a deal with people that are unreasonable.
Expected 35 past the hour at the White House right now. The president leaving toward Marine One on his way out. He is now taking questions from reporters. As soon as we get a chance to share that with you, we will, as we say, Sandra, turn it around, tape playback, whatever phrase you like to use. So depending on how long he talks and how many questions he takes, you'll see it all in its entirety coming up. In the meantime, off to McAllen, Texas now, southern part of the state, any moment now, all of it coming after a heated meeting at the White House yesterday where both sides left with no deal.
The only reason they're against it is because I won the presidency. And they think they can try and hurt us going into the presidency, but that's not going to happen. And we don't give up because we're doing the right thing for our country.
He asked Speaker Pelosi that if he opened things up quickly, if he reopened the government quickly, would she be willing to agree to funding for a wall or a barrier on the southern border? And when she said no, the president said goodbye.
The way they have displayed and their behavior is embarrassing to me. And the way to come out to this floor and talk about a meeting in a manner that did not take place in there is disturbing to me.
We've been having conversations with them, but you cannot come to a conclusion if the President of the United States says, my way or the highway.
This is not a partisan difference. This is a policy difference. And I suggested in the White House, in the Situation Room, in the last meeting, that every time we have a policy difference, shutting down the government is the wrong thing to do.
Various reaction there. Nancy Pelosi called the president petulant. Peter Ducey is live on the Hill. He's never petulant. Peter, how you doing? Good morning. Any creative ways to end the shutdown? Let's start there. Good morning.
Bill, some lawmakers are trying. A group of moderate Republicans got together last night. Jared Kushner was in the room with them as a go-between with the White House, and they're basically trying to figure out if there is a way to trade border wall money for a DACA fix to help illegals brought to the country as kids. So if Democrats offer little border wall money, it would be a little DACA fix. If they go for big border wall money, it could be a big DACA fix.
There's a process maybe that will pay dividends in making sure the president gets his border security funding and can add some things to the mix that would draw some bipartisan support. It's in its infant stages, no commitment by anybody.
But Senate Democrats have their own plans. Chuck Schumer wants them all on the floor an hour from right now. He's going to try to bring to the Senate floor the spending bills that the Democrat-controlled House just passed. That is expected to be blocked, though, by Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans. Bill.
Peter Ducey on the Hill. Keep us posted. I know you will. There in the hallway. Thank you, sir. Sandra.
Let's bring in Fox News politics editor Chris Stirewalt. Chris, good morning to you.
How do you do?
Yes, how do you do? Good to have you here. We're awaiting the president's remarks. We're getting some of his initial comments as he departs for the border. So far, what we're hearing, he started out making remarks on the wall. He said, we have tremendous unity in the GOP. It's a beautiful thing to see. I'll look over the remarks. You respond to what we're hearing so far.
Well, I mean, look, when you're in a poker game, so this is a low stakes, high stakes poker game. The fight is over very little. We're talking about $3.1 billion, which in the grand scheme of things for our federal government, which is a wastrel, it's not much money. But the stakes are also huge because both sides, for their respective political bases, to which they are captive, right? Both Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi are prisoners of their political bases who make exorbitant demands about a lame topic. So the president and the speaker both are trying to say this is about everything, when really, of course, what these moderates are talking about is true, which is you could compromise on that. The $3.4 billion would be a compromise on this, right in between the two things. So the president is increasing the stakes by going to the border. He's saying that his $5.7 billion is really the key to border security. It's the answer to everything, whereas Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer want to downplay it and say, well, actually, our $2.6 billion is enough.
As for how to pay for it, this is obviously at the crux of the debate. He just said, Chris, as he was departing the White House, if we have the wall, we will have tremendous savings. A wall will pay for itself, he says. During the campaign, I did say Mexico would pay. They're going to pay for it if a trade deal is approved by Congress, he says. And I have a rough translation here, so these are not the exact wording. He said Mexico is paying for the wall indirectly. Obviously, they won't be writing a check. Congress has to approve a deal. Those are the latest from the ground there.
And can you imagine? I just put it in perspective, just a lightly perspective here, which is we're talking about probably more money in the end that won't be dispersed this week, that the federal government is obliged to disperse this week, billions of dollars in payroll for government workers, contracts, loans, all of this other stuff. We're talking about huge money. This is a government that spends not just $4 trillion that it budgets, but then another trillion on top of that. We're talking about huge sums. And this government is shut down. These people aren't working. The economy is not getting the inputs that it normally does over this. And it's just, it's not funny because I understand that real people have real world consequences here. But if you want to know why people hate Washington, if you want to know why people are fed up with Washington, D.C., but political chicanery like this is right at the top of the list.
Chris, on the possibility of declaring a national emergency, when we spoke to the White House yesterday, Kellyanne Conway made it very clear that this is still an option that the president is leaving on the table. He was just asked about that. He said, I have the absolute right to do that. I am not prepared to do that. If this doesn't work out, I will. He says, this is a national emergency. I haven't done it because I want a deal to go through Congress.
Lots of things are national emergencies. Highway fatalities are national emergencies. If you define it that way, if you define what's killing people, what are our problems, what are the things that are breaking the heart of this great nation, there are lots of things that are emergencies. But the Republicans will not let Donald Trump declare a national emergency on this and violate the Article I powers of Congress. They're not going to let him do it because they know that if his successor, if President Kamala Harris says, you know what, we have a national emergency on gun crime in the United States, so I am going to start abridging the Second Amendment because I think that this is a national emergency and because I have deemed it so. So the reason the Republicans in Congress won't let the president do that is that they know that one day there won't be a Republican president, and when that happens, they don't want that president to be able to willy-nilly declare national emergencies and exert broad executive authority.
Senator Marco Rubio was on this program yesterday and echoed a similar sentiment, similar thoughts to you as well on that issue. All right, so we expect the president's play out to come back to us in just a minute, and we'll show that, and our audience can listen for themselves. Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
You bet.
Waiting on that departure, head down to McAllen, Texas. We'll follow that throughout the afternoon. At the moment, speaking to reporters, taking a lot of questions, too. So you'll see it. Ron Johnson, the Republican senator from Wisconsin, is on standby, member of the Homeland Security Committee. How does he feel about the shutdown? How do you get a deal? The senator is next on that live.
A steel barrier, a concrete wall, you can call it whatever you want, but without it, you'll never have, you could have the greatest talent in the world. You will never, ever, in a million years, you will not have border security.